Hello and welcome to Young Blossom 25 Future Leaders Revealed. I'm Inga. With me is my beautiful co-host Vaios. And joining
Hello.
us today is Arun Sudheendran. He's the head of procurement for McCormick Australia and also APAC category director for packaging and external manufacturing. And he is based in Melbourne. Arun, you're our first guest from Australia. And second one from procurement. If we got it all right, and if I say we, it's AI, who we always ask to write a short introduction of our guest. You've been over the past 16 years transforming value chains for some of the world's best known FMCG brands, including your company, McCormick, as well as Nestlé, Reckitt, and Procter Gamble. And specifically at McCormick Australia, you head up the procurement organization across both direct and indirect categories, partnering closely with executive teams to drive growth, profitability, of course, and resilience in a highly dynamic supply chain environment. I think we can safely say it is a highly dynamic function as such. You've been also known as a digital innovation advocate and a thoughtful voice on global leadership culture and how procurement can become a true strategic partner to the business. Very warm welcome to the show, Arun. And tell us, please, what AI does not know about you.
Thanks, Inga and Vaios. Excited to be on this show. What AI probably doesn't know is more the 70% of my life, which is the personal side of me as a friend, a husband, a son, a relative. What you've described probably is a 30% of my work life and my professional life. And the reason I'm on this call today, but there's a large part of me which enjoys dancing, cooking, and a bunch of other fun activities and traveling around the world. So there's a lot more of that personal side that I enjoy and spend time on.
Lovely. Well, it's lovely to have you on the show. And today, during this conversation, we would like to cover a little bit more of your experience with that young generation. Let's call that generation Gen Z. And we're obviously curious to get your view on the learnings that we have gathered so far from the previous episodes. But the fact that you're joining us from Australia and you're the first one from Australia, we're also curious to compare a bit notes. Is that generation significantly different in that part of the world? We have some insights across European countries, but we actually haven't spoken to anybody from down under. So we're very curious to get your perspective on some of the topics we've been discovering lately.
Absolutely. I don't feel there is a significant difference in Gen Z, specifically in Australia. And this is one of my favorite comparisons to make. Um, between generations, I feel like there's almost an invisible language, very similar to how there's almost an invisible language across cultures. So, for instance, you wouldn't go to Japan and pull someone up in a meeting and be rude to them or get angry at them or oppose them. You wouldn't go to France and pretty much say, "Hey, all your leave for August month is cancelled." That would be a major faux pas there. In the same way, I feel like Gen Z across the world speak a different language compared to some of the other generations. And we just need to tune in and we just need to learn to navigate the nuances there. And it's very similar in Australia. There is a cultural layer as well as a generational layer that we've got to learn and navigate. That's simplistically put what's all there is to it.
And Arun, a very warm welcome from my side as well. And you kicked it off so nicely. In your opinion, how is this generation shaping society nowadays? Is it a generation that is leaving a positive mark for you? Do you think we don't have much evidence right now to understand how they're going to shape society over the next years? Because they're coming, they're going to lead.
I would definitely think things are moving in the positive direction from the generational leadership standpoint. Primarily, what I'm really proud of the Gen Z about is the fact that they are vocal, they're clear on their boundaries. They are able to vocalize things that, has been hush hush and discussed about certain challenges and problems we have in the corporate environment. One, they're able to be vocal about it, which is lovely. They are putting their boundaries. The other interesting aspect for me is they do have a lot more emotional language, which none of us had in the past. So when they face a certain situation, they're able to identify whether it's anxiety, burnout, depression. They have a lot more of that emotional language and range compared to the previous generation, which didn't really have it. Whether I like that you talk about the positive or the negative impact, the reality is that is the future, and that's all there's going to be. The other generations at some point will phase out, and throughout human history, that's been the case. So that is the future. We've just got to embrace the positives of that, the negatives of that. We will work towards changing and adapting. So from that standpoint, I feel like almost a responsibility to learn that language that they speak and try and get the best parts out of it and pass on some of the parts which we've learned through hardships and troubles, which I hope the future generations wouldn't have to go through, and we could pass some of it on.
One thing we keep getting as feedback from friends, colleagues, people we talk to is that you give this generation too much airtime. You focus too much on them. They don't deserve it. Positively, negatively, it doesn't matter. They just don't deserve it. What's your perspective on that? Do you think we get it wrong? Do you think it's right to focus on them and provide more airtime as we go along?
I feel like the airtime is a factor of the times that we live in, not necessarily what's on offer. Like we all grew up in generations where there was news channels and movie channels and once a day news events, whereas now it's 24/7 information that's available for anyone any time of the day. So the airtime, I believe, is a factor of the age that we live in rather than Gen Z getting an additional airtime from that standpoint. And the question whether we give due attention and focus to this generation or not so much really depends on what we're trying to build. So some of the organizations, Inga, that you mentioned that I've worked for, P&G, Nestlé, even McCormick, all of these are organizations which are close to 150 or 150 years plus, in the making. And you don't build a 150-year-old organization by focusing on the present. You've got to focus on the future, and this is the future talent pool. In a few years, this is going to be the majority of the talent pool, and then comes Gen Alpha. So if we want to build a 100-year, 200-year-old organization, and that's the focus, then future is where we should focus on understanding, developing, and growing. And if we focus on the present, yes, at present, this will be great, but it doesn't mean we'll be able to build an organization that lasts for the next 100 years. And there are so many examples of excellent organizations who've stayed for 100 years and then just withered away and died. It's probably where they kind of became complacent and stopped focusing on that future.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good reflection. I like that a lot, and I think in probably in the last, I'd say 20 years, the focus was a lot more focused, not solely, but more focused on, how do we build the right structures? How do we build the right organizations with all the ups and downs? But over the last 20 years, with some crises here and there, it was a relatively growth-driven environment with some dips. And I sense like right now we are at this crossroad where this growth playbook does not really work because we're facing so many structural changes. And we both come from, or all three of us were coming from FMCG, right? This industry is quite impacted by many structural changes that are there. We're struggling. And on top of that is a layer where having the young generation that is coming in is also challenging the working norms. They're challenging they're redefining what work means for them. And I thought you already said it, 70% is, my personal life, 30% is just my work, right? It also tells something about how your mindset is set to function and how you distinction and how you position yourself and your time and your passion points. And that generation does that in the same way. And all of a sudden, not only do organizations have to deal with the structural change, which is massive and big headache, on many fronts, whether it is demand or technology, just to name two minor ones, as well as leadership, where the leaders who got us where we are today, that doesn't seem to, like something doesn't seem to work anymore, but these are the same, we're kind of shaping or dictating is the wrong word, but I can't come up with the right one, how the development of that future leadership should look like. Does that resonate? How hard is it to deal with both layers for the organizations, and how could they approach it? What's your take on that?
So there's a multi-layered question from your side. Let me try and answer it in a few angles. So first up, from a leadership development standpoint, I'm a big fan of stripping it down to bare basics and, looking at terms. For example, leader. You've got to lead a group of people, and what do you need to lead? You need to look at what's really good for people, what's motivating them, what's in it for them, and what's the growth opportunity for them. When you really focus on these, what you realize is, hey, there's this whole lot of stuff that I have to unlearn from what I was taught, what I have seen, to when something new comes up, whether it's an external challenge, whether it's a new generation, whether it's technology and AI completely redefining all of the work scope that we have, and maybe even making the knowledge worker obsolete in a sense. So if you go back to the basics there, it's unlearning what you know, assessing the situation in front of you, and then responding and reacting to it, learn from it. And that's the way I see that opportunity to learn from the Gen Z talent, for example. Again, if I go to the basics, what are they really asking? They want good personal, healthy boundaries, good work-life integration, a purpose and a sense of community when they come to work. They'd like flexibility and to be able to create an impact in their jobs. Isn't it what millennials wanted? Isn't it what Gen X or boomers wanted when they started their careers? Over the years, I feel like, we've added on layers of the corporate oil on top of us and built a skin and got into a position where we are like, oh yeah, this is how it works. This is how it's always worked. And something different is a naive worldview. Everyone comes in with a naive worldview. And the fact that there are a lot more tools at hand, there's a lot more conversation that's happening, and probably a lot of companies who are embracing this and organizing for managers and leaders to adapt is a positive sign that things are probably moving in the right direction and not in the wrong direction. I love to draw a parallel here. You talk about workplace harassment, sexual harassment at work, women in workplace. 20 years ago, the situation was very different from what it is today, where women made fun of, where all the protesters and people who complained made fun of and had to go through challenges. Absolutely, yes. But we stand on the shoulders of those who picked up those fights and still persisted on. And that's what I see for this generation, as well as organizations adopting new leadership approaches. Things will change for the positive, and we will end up in workplaces in the future where work-life integration is a lot better. Personal boundaries are well respected. And that way, I have worked across different cultures in India, Dubai, Malaysia, Thailand, and now in Australia, the fifth country. And I love the fact that there are certain governmental interventions and regulations when it comes to work-life balance. For instance, the right to disconnect laws in Australia. There is a almost cultural element of respecting personal boundaries and space. Those are all wonderful aspects of this particular culture and environment that I am fortunate to live in and work in. Similarly, within my organization, back in 2022 at McCormick, Australia, we did a whole project around how do we attract, retain, and grow Gen Z talent specifically.
Wow.
And we heard from Gen Z, we got their feedback, designed certain systems and processes around that, communicated that broadly. So those are all positive signs. And I'm pretty sure there are many examples across the board of where people are learning this, almost to a point where cultural coaching is a standard part of anyone at a senior position managing multiple geographies and culture. This should at some stage become a standard part of our leadership development program. So that's the way I see this evolution and how companies can adopt these changes.
What were the things, if you can share, you guys have learned on your quest, understanding how to attract, retain, and motivate that generation? What were the big call out?
So attracting, retaining, some of it is common to what happens across the world. The sense of purpose, not just KPIs and the role, a sense of community and you know social impact that the organization is making. So we had a group in our one of our sites up in Sunshine Coast where we do work with external partners on our sustainability goals and within the communities that we live in. This group of Gen Z talent in our Sunshine Coast came back and said, hey, it's fantastic you're doing all this work, but we've noticed that some of the waste collection that we do are not going in the right bins. It's something simple we could do. Why are we not doing it? They then not only did not stop at that question, they put up a proposal, did the right things with the vendor who is managing this stuff and made sure that this is happening. So simple things like that on a day-to-day basis, which sometimes you go after the larger things and the grander ambitions and forget that you're still putting plastic bottles on meeting tables when you have a meeting instead of just filling a jug and some glasses. So it's simple things like these and practical stuff that they have brought to our attention. In terms of attracting talent, one interesting aspect that I learned from this group and the work was around how it's not easy in an environment to get into a good job in a multinational organization. And this is not specific to McCormick, because a lot of us are tuned into hiring talent for jobs where they already have experience, knowledge, and capability. We want somebody to deliver from day one. There is limited number of people who are genuinely keen on hiring people who are fresh and developing them, which sometimes yield fantastic results, but it takes a lot more time and intention for us to do it. So systemically, we have been forcing our narrative and forcing our systems to make sure that these kind of things are taken into account during our hiring process, during our onboarding process. Time is spent with the right talent in building their capability. These are things we're doing. We're by no means perfect. Even today, across most organizations, you perform well as an individual contributor, you become a manager without necessarily getting assessed for management skills or how you really deal with team management. I take it a step further. Excellent team managers get into director roles, but at a director role, the expectations and the skill sets are quite different, as I've learned the hard way around rather than getting a coaching to get that right from the start. And I'm pretty sure at a VP or a GM or an MD level, the skill sets are quite different to what is required at the current level. And that systemic understanding of skills required for the job is not happening. And that's because everyone's been busy with KPIs and delivering results. No one was focusing on development. What I found through this interaction and work with the Gen Z talent is if you really focus on their development, more times than not, they'll come back and surprise you with what they deliver. So that's been my personal experience on this and my key learnings from this experience that we had back in 2022, and it's continuing.
I think this is so interesting, and so many things that you can learn on how to engage talent within your wider talent pools for any company. And I'm saying this because I do professional recruitment. One thing, Arun, that sticks with me is you mentioned 2 or 3 times the fact that Gen Z is a generation that values a lot purpose, impact on the planet. Yeah. And they value this in a sense that for many generations would not make much sense. I'm saying this in a way that, if you want to have impact, you need to work hard, blah, blah, blah. But they say, no, I want to have impact, but do it in my way. Do it by keeping this work-life boundaries very, very clear. What is driving this? What is your perspective on this? I assume you're managing also Gen Zers in your work, right?
Correct. So I look at it in a couple of ways. One is the background and context that Gen Z has grown up in. The famous helicopter parenting and a lot more supervision that they've gone through, and not had to like go ahead and face a lot of challenges that the previous generations have. And I'm not saying that facing challenge is a mandatory part of growing up. It's just the way they were brought up. But I also feel, and this is purely my hypothesis here, that every generation has moved up in some aspects on an average up the Maslow's hierarchy. So Gen Z is coming into the workspace probably a much higher position on the Maslow's hierarchy than when baby boomers came in. It was more survival, need to put a roof on top of their heads and have food. That's not the situation most of the Gen Z talent is coming on board with. And back then, as now, it boils down to a return on investment to some extent here. What is the return on the investment of me as a person and my time, my talent within an organization? Back in the day when boomers probably started coming in, if you didn't put in 10, 12 hours and stick by the rules of what was there, they wouldn't have food to eat or have a roof over their head or take care of the family. Today, they've got tons of options. You can start a YouTube channel, become an influencer. There are way more options of earning a living and meeting basic requirements of life. So they are genuinely looking for that purpose and sense of connection. And that's probably something millennials or Gen X's would have gone through as well. In your 20s, you're trying to look for purpose in your life. You're trying to look for meaning, trying to look for variety. We didn't know we could express this. We didn't know we had avenues to do it. We just had to suck it up and, deal with whatever was happening. So in a way, we could be jealous of the Gen Z because they're not willing to do that, because they don't see the return on that investment proportionate to the other options that they have. So that's the way I look at why they tend to behave this way. And we can sit and be jealous about it. But back in our 20s, we were pretty much thinking the same, though we couldn't vocalize it aloud. This is what I feel like. Yeah, let's be real. Gen Z as a group, if you compare it with Gen X, there's a lot more life experience that they've still got to go through. So in our 20s, we were probably doing the same mistakes, doing the same things. It's just that it's a lot more visible today than before. And they are a lot more vocal about it than we could be. Not because we wanted, we essentially wanted, but we couldn't. That was the reality of the situation then.
Yeah, and
I
I think they are also, sorry, Vaios, I 100% agree with you that probably Gen X and Gen Z are very, very similar in so many ways as to, how we looked at, purpose, aspiration, impact, right? We were all kind of same hungry in the same way, but we were a lot more tolerant to whatever was happening around us. We would suck it up. We would not vocalize. We would not articulate it, partly because we couldn't, partly because we didn't think is right, partly because it was just not, there were not enough of us who would start the riot a little bit, right? So they are basically articulating what was in our head, many of us, at least, and they're a lot less tolerant to, some of the things that are happening. And as a result, they build a higher value principles. Now it sounds very dramatic, but yeah, that's what it boils down to, right? I had a conversation that it fits into this. I had a conversation yesterday with a 24-year-old person, and we were talking about, career and progress and career design and development path. And I said to him, I said, look, I quite like how your generation is taking a pick on career portfolio building. Like, you guys don't sit down and wait and, a job comes up, okay, I go, but in the parallel, I have a YouTube channel, or I have my own AI agency, or I'm building AI agents and I'm doing a consultancy work. So you're a lot more active and a lot more diversified. Is it intentional? Are you doing it on purpose? Are you just, don't know what to do with my time, and instead of scrolling, I go and I do that? To also think about well, it's a necessity. I'm like, what do you mean it's a necessity? He's like, well, some may say we have all these endless opportunities. It's all there, but at the same time, there is a lot of uncertainty as well. Well, I have a job. Well, and now the tone starts to shift because how the economy is moving and how jobs are moving. They're still not giving up on values. They will not hang in there for the sake of it if they don't have to. They will still go after the YouTube channel if they can monetize it, and it will provide basic living. So he highlighted two tensions. Number one is, whereas our generation, I just throw all the three of us in the same pot. Our generation, we started working, and with every job we were taking, we were becoming more wealthy. That was because the economic environment was also having a favorable development. For that generation, with every job they're taking, they're not becoming more wealthy. And in fact, they're questioning how they're going to build their wealth. So as a result, they're like, we have a lot more opportunities than whoever before us. It's a lot harder to sit here and say, okay, I'm going to do this job because it's probably not going to provide the same as it used to. So we have to be more active. At the same time, we are saying they're not hustling enough. And at the same time, there is a stat, let me read it out. The Gen Z is the generation that is with over 50%, that is the highest, that is prone to workplace exhaustion. I guess it's called burnout. React to that, please, to that chain of, tensions and being torn in between and them being burned out. Whereas the work-life balance that they emphasize so much on and the purpose and the impact results into something really unhealthy.
The way I see it, and I'll draw on an example here. One of my team members retired a few years ago, when he was 65. And he was telling me a story of, when he bought his first house, that was roughly 4x his annual salary, the cost of a house. So it was very affordable for that person. 4x the cost of somebody starting on a job today will not afford a decent housing in most markets around the world. So there is that real crisis of how salaries across the world, especially at starting and initial levels, have grown versus things like cost of living or cost of housing. And there are cost of housing crises across multiple countries in the world. So that is a reality of the environment. What this generation is also grappling with is mass layoffs, thousands of people being laid off, and they're constantly bombarded with that information. 20 years ago, you would hear about it probably through news, whereas here 24/7, you have access to this kind of information. With social media and algorithms, what's also become prevalent is the algorithm shows you what you want to see and hear, and that reinforces that positive loop, whether it's in one direction or the other. It reinforces whatever your existing belief is to some extent. So they have this constant bombardment of information that I understand why, with a few extra things to manage at work, they can get exhausted because they're already under so much tremendous pressure and strain from this constant barrage of information, having to prove themselves, comparing themselves with a lot of others. And I'm not even saying it's a Gen Z problem now. Millennials, Gen X, anyone who is using social media does have to go through some of these things themselves. So that takes up a lot of mental space. So it's understandable that there is a sense of exhaustion or burnout that creeps in. What's equally relevant and true is the fact that if you're able to genuinely direct people in a certain way and give them coaching and guidance, it can turn things around really well as well. I'll share an example of one of the younger talent in our organization. She was of the firm belief that if I need to grow in my career, I need to do more of this stuff and be an expert at whatever I'm doing. And that's a very limited worldview of I do more of the same, I get better opportunities. It was impossible to share and verbally tell her that, hey, this is not how the way promotions and growth works in organizations. The skill sets are different. Primarily because she's had so much information and material where she would have probably read and understood that this is the way things are. And that's reinforce her belief. It took a lot more patience, coaching, showing by examples, highlighting different people in the organization, and a lot more time for this person to finally realize, hey, these are skills that I need to pick up, and those are the skills that's likely to take me on the path that I really want to. So sometimes it's about guiding them the right way rather than causing them a burnout with them trying to do more of what they are doing and trying to grow in their career, and that really not coming through simply because that's just not the way the current structures work. So sometimes it's about guiding them and giving them a bit of nudge here and there. Coming back to your question on the hustle culture part, I believe the criticism around hustle culture comes from people who have hustled in a certain way. That's just not the reality of the world we live in. You don't need to spend weeks preparing presentation or building a website. It's a matter of minutes. So anyone who spent weeks and months building that skill and seeing someone do it in 30 seconds using an AI tool is like they're not hustling enough. So it's understandable where that comes from. But what I would genuinely suggest is that we try and understand from the other person's shoes as much as Gen Z should try and understand from some of the other generation's shoes as to why they are saying certain things and try and grasp that. But it's never really a 50-50 pathway there. We've got to go 80% of the way because we've got experience on our hand and we are the more mature generation to that sense. So we've got to go 80% of the way and expect the generation to come 20% and meet us. And that's where that balance and growth really happens, learning from each other rather than, trying to just force your own set of beliefs of what a hustle culture should be, what work-life balance should be, what loyalty to work means. It's very different. Again, the same Gen Z talent in her second week of stepping up to fill in her manager's parental leave. And so we have a 6-month parental leave, and this lovely dad who had adopted a kid went on a 6-month leave. So this person stepped up as a backup for the senior manager. And second week, she comes and tells me, hey, I'm in charge of this portfolio. Let me handle this stuff. And I was like pleasantly surprised, but it was also important for me to go and tell her, I'm sorry, I overstepped my boundary. You lead this portfolio. It's your stuff to do. And she did wonders in the 6 months because she genuinely felt that was her portfolio to manage. And that was the reinforcement that I gave her. And she did absolute wonders in that position there.
I think that's a really great great perspective. It seems we lost Vaios on the way. I think he must have some internet issues, but that's okay. He's gonna join as soon as he fixes it. I do like how you phrase it. We often forget, we project a lot.
Absolutely.
We project a lot. This is the trouble I went through. This is what caused me, let's say, burnout. And many assume that burnout only comes from work. Well, yeah, but it also comes from context. I was reading yesterday from a connect on LinkedIn. She used to work on Google and said I was burnout, not because I was working at Google, but because post-COVID, I started traveling like a crazy person. And I started trying to basically catch up what I missed in the 2 years of COVID. I tried to put it in a month. And
Yeah.
I just burned myself to the ground that I couldn't function. So things come from different angles and perspectives. And I think often we project, and if we say we're like, some people are extremely resilient and you can overload them with all kinds of things and they will still be okay because they have different coping mechanisms as we all have, right? So that resonates a lot with me. And if I switch a bit gears and we talk a bit more about workplace and this generation, Lloyd study from 2025, only 6% of Gen Z say reaching leadership position is their primary career goal. 6%. Well, one way to see it, there will not be a lot of competition. Good news, I guess. The other way to see it, where kind of all the career path and development structures are very much based on you climb as you take over more responsibility, which unavoidably comes with leadership responsibility in some form and shape. And I am not aware of too many companies that have paths for subject matter expert careers. What's your pick on that? How should that environment change, shape, or maybe not for the future? Welcome back, Vaios.
Absolutely, people should be able to bring their authentic selves to work. And as part of their authentic self, if managing a large group of people is not something they're keen on, they should still be able to build a career, in the right fields and right areas. Across like different organizations I've worked for, including McCormick, there are fortunately technical career paths in certain functions and areas that you can grow in. So that's definitely an option that's available. But I also feel this whole reluctance to leadership positions that exists today. And I've had people come and talk to me about this stuff. And, when you really sit and probe there, it's not a reluctance to leadership positions. It's a reluctance to adopt all the positives and the sacrifices that are required in those leadership positions. And when I say sacrifices in those leadership positions, it's the historical set of sacrifices that we have glorified as resilience and corporate muscle building and leadership muscle building. Some of those are problematic, and those were the set of things that some of the people that I spoke to had a reluctance to pick up and run with, saying, hey, I don't want to be available 24/7 as a leader or a senior C-suite executive. You would be expected to. But I also feel that's probably an unjustified one to expect a human being to be available 24/7 when work is just a part of her or his life, and it shouldn't consume 24 hours of a person's life. So it's probably that expectation mismatch that in a large way is part of why this reluctance is. And my hope is the new set of leaders who are coming up in the mid management today and growing into executive positions, they see it differently and build a brand of leadership that's different from what people are used to, a brand of leadership that is more balanced, more able to bring their authentic selves to work, more in control of their time and yet delivering. So my personal journey as a millennial going into leadership and now in an executive position has been one of chasing titles and goals and salaries, and then looking for being the best person who delivers all the results. And it took me close to 35 plus years of my life to figure out, hey, I've got a purpose beyond this in leadership. You have this amazing potential to impact people's lives. It's a huge responsibility as much as it is a privilege to have. And you're not just impacting people's work life, you're impacting their personal milestones, how they celebrate, their 40th or 50th birthdays, how they celebrate their kids' graduation, how they mourn their family's death. You as a leader have tremendous influence on all these aspects of another person's life. That's a huge responsibility and a huge privilege. And to me, when I genuinely changed that perspective to how can I really help this person have a meaningful work, have a meaningful life, and enjoy their life as much as the work, that one took away the KPI pressures from myself and my team. That was insanely liberating for me to focus on how do I grow the people and help them rather than focus on the KPIs. And I was a person who focused on KPIs for the large part of my career as an individual contributor and for many years as a manager as well, learning the hard way that that's not really the focus. The moment this purpose shifted, life became a lot more meaningful. And, when then you really want to grow because the amount of influence you have is much larger on a much larger set of people, and the kind of systemic changes that you can bring about supports a lot more people in those aspects. So that then makes you want some of these leadership positions, roles, and growth simply because you can meet your purpose a lot more meaningfully than where you are today. So I personally think that reluctance is a rejection of the outdated value systems of leadership rather than a rejection of simply leadership position. Given the right purpose and the right mindset, I believe Gen Z, as with other generations, will pick this up, and at some stage they are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. There is no denying that fact. So at some stage, that shift is likely to happen. For me personally, it took me a corporate bullying scenario from my manager, an HR complaint, to really understand what the organization valued as resilience and leadership muscle and all of that. And then after hearing that, wallowing in self pity for a while, suddenly it hit me. This is absolute nonsense. You're asking people to go through unnatural situations in the name of leadership muscle and corporate muscle. That's not how the way workplaces should be designed and work. So that really helped me challenge and see perspective and build my own conclusions of what leadership should look like. Obviously, I stand on the shoulders of a lot of fantastic leaders I've had in my career, learning from them. But those really shaped my view of leadership. And I'm pretty sure you, Inga and Vaios, have your own views on what leadership is. And it's not necessarily catering to the traditional. If you Google it now, you'll see a traditional view, which probably is not what is on your mind, because you're leading a fantastic organization working with Gen Z talent, and that shows me that you're thinking differently from that traditional view. So that's where I think the Gen Z talent, or any generation that comes forward, will define their own leadership, will embrace it, and find their purpose in it. That's been human history all these years. We've always found our purpose and move forward.
Yeah, 100%, 100% agree. I like how you frame it's rather rejection of outdated norms, leadership norms, what exists, what they're exposed to right now in many instances. Because I also want to highlight that probably what you talked about right now is still more exception than the rule, unfortunately. We still have quite, and I don't want to say outdated is the right word, because it worked for a certain period of time, for a certain environment, and the leadership that is built based on, knowledge, tracking, and all that emphasis on fewer business metrics, and in how many meetings have we been where there is a business agenda and there is a people agenda, and on the agenda, on the piece of paper, it's always 50-50 time allocation. The reality is that you take up 90% of the time for business because you overrun all the topics, and then there is 10% of time eventually left to talk about people, which, by the way, have to deliver all that business, and then you rush through them. It's half cooked, half baked, and there we are. And that young generation feels it, they experience it, they feel it, they live it. And I come back to what I said at the beginning, that are a lot less tolerant to that. I think Florian was here, who is working for one of the big recruiting companies, and he said they're also intolerant to organizational misfunctions and malfunctions. So if we're laying off people and we don't have the processes and the workflow straight, they will not take up with that, more work, even less productive work, not well thought through work. And if we don't listen to them, well, as a result, we should not be surprised that 40% of people actually claiming, I'm going to leave the job in the next 12 months. Now, all of that is a dialogue, and I'm going to come to a question that, this morning when I was thinking about what is that one big question I would like to ask you. What would be the advice to your self as Gen Z?
Self as Gen Z. I wish I was that bold as Gen Z today. Uh, but no, my advice to myself as Gen Z really is be open and curious about a different perspective than yours, because it's very hard to get disillusioned by what you're seeing in organizations and comparing it against what you see online or what information you read up. The moment you try to understand it and explore it further, you get a different perspective. I'm not saying that's the right thing or the wrong thing, but you get a perspective and you understand what is happening a lot better than if you were just cruising through it, believing that all this layoff that's happening is wrong, and what I'm reading up about what's happening in the industry is what's right, and hence I'm getting disillusioned. It definitely helps that disillusionment and nothing much else. And that's where trying to understand is helpful. The second point, and this is probably to many, many me's as Gen Z, as a group here, is continue to be vocal about the things that Generation Z is vocal about. There needs to be more dialogue on the topics that they are raising. So the more people raise those topics, the more hopefully change happens in the positive, and challenge the norms. So for instance, if a C-suite executive is saying to a Gen Z person who prepared a proposal and shared, hey, I don't think this would work, my experience says otherwise. And if the Gen Z person gets offended or angry, it's considered they're not resilient enough. But if you reverse the situation and a Gen Z person is saying, hey, based on my experience, I don't think C-suite executive, your proposal works for this company, that will suddenly be termed as naivety and lack of diplomacy and not having the right business savvy attitude and stuff. So again, we're using very different terms for similar situations. In a world where knowledge is getting commoditized, we should start to look at getting opinions from everyone. Your experience was good as much as knowledge work was limited and scarce. Now where it's a commodity and consultant presentations could be prepared in a few minutes, it's a different world out there. So we've got to think and reframe some of these things ourselves. There's a classic case of the person not being mature if it's a junior person doing this, and if it's a senior person doing this, it's just he's assertive and he's a senior leader, or there's even gender biases in there, and not even getting into that. But that's the world we live in, and that's the reframing that we've got to do overall as a group. And Gen Z being vocal with some of the things, and I'll continue asking them to be more vocal about it, will really help that change in a positive way.
It's so, as you were talking, it reminded me of how the commentary sometimes works and how we react to the same thing that I might say and a 10, 15-year younger person might say. We might say exactly the same thing. The reaction is going to be very different. And the other day, I stumbled upon a girl who is writing a lot about Gen Z on LinkedIn. And I saw an outrageous amount of comments. So before commenting, because sometimes your statements are a bit controversial, controversy is also to spark conversation. So I looked through the comments, and the comments are written in such a disrespectful way, like making fun of her, making fun of things that are, not relevant. What font type she has chosen to put on a post. So I went to see her profiles. She's Gen Z, and I read the comments and I'm like, this is really disrespectful. So I commented, I left a balanced comment. I didn't agree with everything. I agreed with some. You would never read that. But if I post anything on Gen Z, I get some controversial comments. I would never get a disrespectful comment. So that is also something we feel entitlement to comment on. Okay, you disagree, please disagree. But if I go to younger people posting on LinkedIn, the comments can be quite patronizing.
Absolutely.
You don't see that a lot, if at all, on people who are, more senior, more experienced, more whatever. Very resonates a lot. I think it's a really good advice to yourself. We are 57 minutes in. I can't believe it. I always ask. I saw you struggling a little bit with your connection. No worries. I would move us to the lightning round. Arun, are you familiar with the lightning round?
Yes. I've seen a few episodes, and I'm dreading the lightning round.
Don't. We started slow, fast-paced question. Don't overthink it. Your favorite chat channels? How do you chat with?
Usually WhatsApp. Yeah. That's my favorite go-to.
Social media you spend the most time on?
It's both LinkedIn and, unfortunately, Instagram.
You get your music from?
Spotify and YouTube.
You get your podcasts from?
Usually on LinkedIn or Instagram, whatever shows up, I would then, if something interests me, go and check it up on YouTube or Spotify. So that's where I primarily get most of the selections from.
Interesting. Your favorite AI tool?
Gemini at the moment.
Okay. Physical books or audiobooks?
Always a fan of physical books.
The one skill you would recommend Gen Z to learn?
One skill is be curious and open about why certain things are happening in this world and try to understand, and then react and respond accordingly. They already have the emotional language too. So just react and respond accordingly after being curious as to why.
A famous person you would like to meet?
Probably Simon Sinek, just to dig his brain. Honestly, I would love to meet a lot of leaders that I see on LinkedIn and other areas, probably not as famous in certain circles, just to challenge some of their thought process or dig their brains and like figure out why they think a certain way. Just curiosity wise, yeah, absolutely. A lot of leaders and writers on LinkedIn that I would just reach out and have a chat with.
This is it. It was not that bad, right? You were
That's
dreading it.
not bad. I just built it up in my head.
It was really lovely having you on the show and getting your perspective. There are many new nuggets that we got out of it and in your perspective, and very enriching as well to our listeners.
Thank you.